Right. This is going to be quite experimental for me. I've never done this before, I don't think. I might have done in some guise, but I haven't actually bothered to sit down and explain or discuss or detail the exact experiences in my life as a diagnosed schizophrenic who I consider to be myself illuminated by God, which I'll get on to, because this is a symposium or a bit of dialogue, or not a dialogue, a diatribe, no, that's not good, a discussion of one, a lecture if you like, not a lecture, I'm not saying I know anything for sure, all I can tell you is what I've been through. But however, to cut a long story short, and it will be quite a long story, this one, if you bother to listen, and it might be quite interesting for you because it's all to do with my litany of epiphanies that I've had and my walk with mental ill health, in inverted commas, because this is a deep, profound question of whether or not I am mentally ill. I am not in pain, so for that I give great thanks. Huge thanks to God, who indeed did help me a number of times after prayer, sincere prayer from the soul, not the mind. What I mean by that is when you have a relationship with God, you do have to obey, and you do have the basic rules, and you know them. You should know them if you're Western or even Eastern by now. The basic 10 commandments, that sort of jazz. Love thy neighbour, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Love God with a real heart. All standard across the board stuff. But when I was growing up, I didn't take it very seriously because I didn't really know about it as deeply then. And I was too young and naive and greenhorn and ignorant to truly appreciate the religious education I had at an elite boarding school. I always kind of open to the notion of God. But then between the ages of about 16 and 20, I discovered drugs, hard drugs, chemical drugs. I've never done heroin or crack, but I did things like acid, ease, speed, bit of cocaine, not much. I never got too into that because I could see it was far too enjoyable. And dangerous, very, very dangerous. It immediately makes you stupid as soon as you inhale. I can feel the retardation when I've done it in the past. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, what is mind? What is consciousness? What is actuality? What is reality? What is God? Okay, and it's clear to me that even in the greatest and most advanced minds on the planet that people listen to in podcasts and give lectures to and go to read books such as by Eckhart Tolle, who I do not think knows the true meaning of illumination or enlightenment. Much the same words really when you know what I'm talking about, which I have to say you do not, because enlightenment to me, or rather illumination, divine holy illumination, was the second of my major epiphanies back in 1995, and it's 30 years this year I have been gilded in divine light by God. But when I tell people that, they just look at me like I'm insane. Right? I've even once declared as a kind of chat-up line in London. I wasn't really trying to pull her, but we were being friendly. And I happened to drop the point that I'm a son of God during the apocalypse. And she looked at me like I was recently released from a nut house, which I kind of was, because about 10 years ago I was sectioned for 3 months for chronic psychosis. And I didn't even do much that bad, really. If you look at the reasons they sectioned me for so long, it really wasn't too terrible. I never murdered anyone. I've never done anything too shameful, I don't think, apart from stealing when I was in my youth to get money to pay for the weed at boarding school because I had no income, obviously, being at boarding school. And that was a real low point in my entire life when I was a thief. And I was a drunk. I was just an idiot. I did all my work. I passed all my exams more or less, apart from politics, which I couldn't stand because I think I took communism too seriously back then. And I realized as a 50-year-old man what an idiot I was as a youth. Now, as you get older, looking back with knowledge of how you should conduct yourself in a wise society, it is quite horrific sometimes when you've been a wayward child, to look back at your youth and realize how many times did I embarrass myself, cock up, screw up, do something stupid. Oh my gosh, the litany is just unreal. And I'm not even one of the worst offenders. There are lots of us idiots out there. And I was saved from that life by God. There's no two ways about it. You can't convince me otherwise. I know what happened to me. You do not. And therefore, I'm going to explain to you what happened to me in 1995 up until the present day, only using the chapters, if you like, of each legitimate epiphany I've had along the way. And an epiphany is basically a God realization. And the first time I ever got stoned, I was 15 years old at boarding school. And I felt like I became superhuman. And I made all the girls laugh so much with my witty banter that the boys who had given us the weed, some older boys from foreign fields, didn't like the fact that I'd had the command of all the ladies' attention with my jubilant and jocund rhetoric and classic displays of amusing banter. And so they took me, an arm each, and they pulled me towards this lake. And they were going to throw me in the lake to teach me a lesson and humiliate me. And I thought, hold on, chaps, this isn't too sporting. And I noticed there was a tree ahead of me. So instead of being pulled into the lake, I pulled them by running at the tree. I ran up the tree. I did a backflip, and that released my arms from their clutches. And I lightly bashed their heads against the trees and walked back to the ladies, who were astonished at my performance. And that just came with the sheer belief and fearless ease that I could do what I planned to do at that point in time. I can't do backflips normally, especially not sober, even off my head. But with a tree, it's not too difficult. And I just had sheer belief in what I was going to do was going to work. And I did it, and it worked. And I was not humiliated, but I took effective action in the face of threat to limit the threat from my position of empowerment. And I walked out a bit of a legend that day, if I'm honest. And I remember walking back home with Ras, my good friend from the Seychelles. And I said, I feel like a god. And I don't mean God. I just meant I felt like supremely powerfully, supernaturally aware and understanding of many things, and everything was beautiful and wonderful and powerful and funny. Funny being very important. Now, the point is, in 1995, I was living at the worst nadir of my year, and it was the year my wishes had come true. And this is another paradox in reality. You can get wishes that come true in this life, but be careful what you wish for in case they come true. I've had a number of wishes in my life answered in my youth, and my wishes were extensive in 1995. I wanted to live in a big house with all my chums, my girlfriend at the time, a car, lots of money to buy drugs, studying the subject of my dreams, and just having a whale of a time for a year. I got all of that and more, but what I hadn't realized is that getting everything you wanted so quickly, so young, I was living like a 20-year-old king at art college with my men and my queen in this three-story building of 7 bedrooms in Winton in Bournemouth, and studying the subject of my dreams. And I was not attending enough because I was too often off my head. And I was doing a lot of acid. And acid is a terrible, terrible drug, and I do not recommend it. But at the time, I was too stupid to realize the dangers I was giving myself. And the more I did, the more and more it got worse and worse. Until one day, in 1995, I'm sitting on a chair, and I'm in what I can only describe as a state of hell in my mind. No flames, there was no fire involved, but it was just a kind of quasi sense of feeling like infinite sufferance and agony and terror at the likes of which I've never known since or before. And I've nearly died once, but I didn't feel much pain when I was nearly dying from pneumonia at 14. But that was another matter. Anyway, this hell trip was so crippling and powerfully bad that I'm still a partially broken man 30 years on to this day, mentally and physically. It was just, I can't describe how fear-inducing it was. And it wasn't just a bad trip. I've had lots of bad trips because I'm a sort of idiot who doesn't learn from his first error. But anyway, all I did was pray, pretty much, in a chair, in my mind, for those 10 hours of sufferance. And when it wore off, I was nearly a broken man. Well, I was a broken man, I suppose. But God healed me in light, because I kept muscling on. I was really, really damaged for some time in my mind, doing all these drugs. And like speed was another one we did a lot of. And I went to Glastonbury, and I had 3 days and 3 nights where I walked around, and there were hundreds of people, thousands of people. And I swear they were following me at times and talking to me and whispering things to me all the time. I could hear everything. I could see everything. I knew what was going on. They sent me a coded message in a newspaper wanting me to break the legs of a black king because I was looking quite fit and powerful, and people were kind of respecting me in a sort of daunting way of fear. But I was not trying to cast fear, but I was dressed all in black and I looked pretty smooth, I have to say. And a funny little story that happened that weekend was I was at where was it? The Avalon Fields, and they've got the stones at the Avalon Fields, and I was chilling there having a smoke. And this little girl and her mother come up with a bucket, and it said, "Help the badgers." And she went, "Give us £1 to help the badgers." And I thought, oh, all right, I'll help this little girl's dream, save the badgers, not really thinking that badgers were pests and probably should be destroyed by farmers for ruining the land. And then I flicked her £1 in the bucket to save the bally badgers. And she looks at me, this little girl, and says, "When I grow up, I'm going to piss in your face." And I was like, what? I was dumbfounded for one of the first times in my life. I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, I just shut up and I think I moved on. I will never get over that. All sorts of things I heard that weekend. Anyway, it culminated on the third day for me with these guys of a little group of friends standing up. I'll never forget it. And one of them's got his hands raised and he's going, "War!" Like this, and I'm like, whoa, wait, hold on. You want a war? You want me to start a war, or you want to war me? I mean, what's going on here? I was only armed with a corkscrew. I had no intention of dripping blood on any ground, let alone holy ground. And some people believe Glastonbury is holy ground. And the idea of conflict and violence, I just couldn't muster. I realised a long time ago I can't feign anger. So if I am angry, there's usually a jolly good reason for it. But I was not angry, I was too off my head. But I wasn't in a good mood. I was frightened, if I'm honest, for much of the time. I was like, what the dickens do these people think I am and what's going on? Anyway, I decided that was the time to leave, because I thought if I'm creating this manifestation of negative power, then I should probably leave before someone gets hurt. And so I did, and I took Karen, and she missed the cure, which she was a bit gutted about, but I insisted we had to go at that point. And we left. One person called me a coward, and I then heard a massive explosion behind me, but there was no bomb, obviously. It was on the speakers, I think. And I walked out. I dropped a bag of speed on the ground because I was paranoid I was going to get searched leaving the premises by the bodyguards. And I just dropped a big bag of speed intentionally on the ground. Got into a car, drove all the way back to Sussex to drop off Karen. And every signpost I saw on the road had a double meaning that I could understand the meaning of. The only one I can remember is Wincanton, which meant win, can, ton, which I translated to mean the win, can, ton, like 100, be heavy. Like, you know what I mean? It's like a ton is a nice result in Cockney sort of dealings with money. You call it a ton, it's 100, or it weighs a ton. You know, it's a A hefty piece of worthiness is a ton, and the wind can be heavy, right? It's weird thinking, I know, but every signpost I could translate into its double meaning, and they were all over the country as I traversed across counties. So anyway, I got Karen to safety, I got me back home to safety, and a couple of days later, I'm going to bed. And I am shitting myself that just by turning up at Glastonbury, I have unwittingly started a war. And I thought they were going to come and find me and kill me. And I went to bed, and I was very, very scared indeed. And then all the fear dispersed, and I heard a voice from the divine realm, like no other, like God, but a bit like mine, but it wasn't mine. It was more like God's. If God had a voice, it was so profound, serious, but comforting, and it just said, "Continue," like that. I had no fear then. Continue. So I woke up and carried on for a few days. 3 days later, again, I'm going to sleep, and I'm going to bed, and I'm scared, so scared again, and this time this golden light came down in my mind from the heavenly realms of God. And it only lasted a flashing second, but it changed me forever. That's the power of a legitimate epiphany. I will never be the same as I was before that state. And I am different after that light state, because I've seen the light literally in that sense. I am illuminated by God for keeping the faith in love and peace. I don't think my flag at Glastonbury helped the cause, because looking back it was a bit dark, but I thought it was a work of art actually. But I wasn't aware back then of the dark connotations of a pentagram, for instance, and it was done in 3D with all these symbols inside it all the way around it. It looked a bloody work of art, but it could have been construed by minds as demonic, but it was certainly not intended to be demonic. It was intended to be a masterpiece for work of art. Anyway, I digress. This is not about the flag at all. It's about the illumination. And so I suddenly realized, wow, halos are real. Halos are real. I've got a halo. And they're also, I believe, in the Bible called crowns of life, or, if you will, crowns of light, to perhaps a monk who didn't perhaps know what someone was talking about. Mentioned in James 1:12, where you get the crown of life for passing your trial, which some believe is life, but I think that is wrong. I don't think you can get your crown of life while you're alive, and you don't have to die afterwards. It's a reward for keeping your faith in peace and love in God during a very difficult trial of power involving others. And they put me through a lot in that Glastonbury, but they probably don't remember it. I do, vividly. Anyway, so I got illuminated, and I went down into the kitchen the next day to my mum and said, "Mum, I'm illuminated. I've become Buddha." And she looked at me like I'd gone mad. And then, and I was hearing voices around this time anyway. But the continued voice was like a voice like no other. It came from a divine higher realm than all the demonic voices which come from dark, grotty voices. And I've heard in my 30 years of schizophrenia over 400,000 death threats and humiliating threats towards me and my loved ones in my mind from my supernatural brain. And my brain is presumably supernatural because of all the stupid stuff I did when I was young, and I mean the mind-expanding chemicals and whatnot. Once you've taken acid, it's very hard to relate to other human beings because they don't know what you're really talking about. If you're tripping with others, they know exactly what you're talking about in and of the events that transpire of the day. However, other human beings used to a conscious state of normality generally, even if they've dabbled with weed or beer or spirits or speed or even ease, I'm going to push it that far, none of them can come close to the mind-bending properties of LSD. And it is so horrific. It is so scary and painful and bad if it goes wrong that I'm glad I haven't touched it for 30 years, but I'm still hugely affected by the experiences I've had all that time ago. I need to smoke weed most days just to give me some quality of life and comfortability in my psyche after the knowledge I have witnessed to what could be a state posthumously if one is wicked in this world. Because you see, I totally think that I was being punished by God for my wayward activities. I was sinning way too much when I was 20 years old, 1789. I was off the rails. I thought I was Robin Hood, mate, at public school. I would get stoned and go and steal from people at school in their rooms, give it to my mate in Henley. He would flog it. I'd get the money and we'd have a week of getting high with my chums. And this was my Robin Hood approach to dealing with living in a very rich environment when I didn't actually have much money myself. And I justified my theft in a religious school. That's how off the chart psychotic I was from a young age. I justified the theft using Robin Hood, John Lennon, and Karl Marx as, as historical minds who might be thinking that, property is not important, man. But no, theft. Let's make no bones about it now. I'm 50 years old now. Theft is a big sin. It's not technically a hellfire sin. There are 8 hellfire sins, one of which is lying. But theft isn't one of them, strangely. But I think that's because it's just material goods. And even though it's cripplingly bad sin, I'm a bit like Mace Windu. I brush with the hell side, the dark side. But I managed through prayer and changing my ways to get over it and not fall into oblivion of Hades and pain and sufferance or whatever. It might be a lie awake for me if I didn't change my ways. So it was like a huge warning, because I want to talk about pain. Pain is just clear and present to me. Pain exists because there is something wrong. Our default state of existence is not painful. And that's a lesson in and of itself. We are not in pain generally. So when we are in pain, there is something wrong. And that's as simple as it is, okay? Your consciousness should not be in pain. If you dabble with mind-bending chemicals and things like that and very dangerous substances, you run the risk of serious misissue with your consciousness and pain. And huge swells and levels of sufferance that you prescribe to yourself like a moron. It's not self-medication if it makes you suffer. It's just idiocy. So you see, it's easy not to do acid once you've been to the health state, because it's not addictive physically or mentally, but you just got to be smart and just think that is bad news. So anyway, the pain is gone, but the memory lingers. And this brings me to another epiphany. An epiphany where I had a prayer answered in 2017. And you're not going to believe this. It's very hard to believe for anyone, but it's absolutely true. And you can take all your mathematicians and your physicists at CERN and tell them what you're about to hear, and they won't believe it. You won't believe it. Christians probably won't believe it. No one will probably believe it. Muslims probably won't believe it. But I know what happened. I was sitting on a bed at my father's house in 2017. And I was in some pain because I've liked to smoke and drink most of my years. Because it's great. It's a lovely thing. And I think it was having a bit of toll on my body, and I was physically and mentally exhausted and somewhat pain. And I don't like pain at all. And so I just prayed to God. I said, please God, help me. That was the extent of that prayer. That's all I said. And I said it from my soul, not my mind. And as I opened my eyes, I could feel and almost see this shimmer ahead of me in the air. And I could sense with my entire being a particle fall out of this vortex in the air and go through my sternum into my heart. A couple of days later, I'm back in my flat and I feel the same particle. I can't tell you why I know that, I just do. It just popped back out of my heart. And I thought, wow, what was that? God has put something in my heart beyond the halo. And I thought, this is massive. This is huge. This, along with the vision along with the witness of the angels of light who came to teach me not to smoke in bed one year, and I haven't smoked in bed since 2012 when they came. It's enforcing the idea in me that my idea of reality is closer to divinity than most people are aware of. I have attained the crown level of light by God. I do firmly believe in the higher Lord power God. I have seen miracles. I've had prayers answered. I've even nearly been killed by a succubus once. In 1996, I went to a temple in Neasden, a Hindu temple, one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen in my life. It's in Neasden in London. And we went inside this beautiful marble dome. And it was just heavenly. And I came out, we went home, I went to see a friend, and we had a joint, nothing new there. I drove home, and I felt high as a kite. I felt high and heroic as Luke Skywalker, having just blown up the Death Star. Don't know why, I just felt amazingly good and supernaturally, intergalactically, divinely heroic. And I got home, and I went to bed. This is where many of my epiphanies happen, by the way, in bed. And they're not dreams, I am awake when they happen. And as I went to bed, I merely thought to myself, I'm higher than God, right? Which is obviously stupid. You can't get higher than God. But it was a colloquial kind of thought, it was like to represent how high I felt. I felt so goddamn high, right? And it was ridiculous. And as soon as I felt I'm higher than God, I left my body, went into the astral zone, flew through a golden hoop in the astral plane, and I could look down upon this topography of India, and it was mottled brown and black surface with a blue squiggle. It didn't look like land in reality, but I somehow knew it to be land of India in the astral plane. And there was a red square on top of the river, and it split into a smaller red square and a blue square of the same size, and they animated upper left and bottom right of my vision, and then bosh, I was back in bed, and I was like, what the dickens just happened to me? And then I went to Phoenix Festival a few days later and couldn't afford to get in, so just camped on the periphery, had a wild night of spiritual joy and wonder, and ripped open Putsy's tent to escape because I couldn't work the zip. So anyway, that's a brief explanation of some of the bulk of my epiphanies. But the point is that these epiphanies, although they are few and far between, are nonetheless quite profoundly important to the true nature of reality. I am not a mathematician. I'm a bit of a scientist, but I'm not really a mathematician. And I hated maths when I was a boy. I only got to C at GCSE, and it was a real struggle. And I do not look at the world mathematically. I look at the world experientially. And in what I experience, but just by perceiving, observing, I realize I have control in my environment to operate, to do, to act, to be, to think, to perform, to whatever. And the importance is that with epiphanies, they change your perspective on reality at a very profound level. I'm not going back. You can't undo an epiphany. And yet the amount of atheists online who take umbrage to these truths and think it's all bullshit and psychotic and evil, and it's not. It's attributed to psychosis, but psychosis is misunderstood. Psychosis is defined as a loss of contact with reality, but what is reality, to coin that well-weathered cliche? Well, that's the point. The point is, halos are real, out-of-body experiences are real, angels are real, answered prayers are real, miracles are real, when it's going in the right direction for whatever forces you're conjuring or needing or yearning for under God as a believer in the multi-user dimension of Earth. And this is huge. This is hugely profound, because I'm still drinking and smoking, but I'm still not in any pain. I'm 50. I've had friends pass away younger than me who didn't smoke or drink as much as me. And I'm just very thankful a lot of the time just to cogitate as one, as a singularity, in my room, pondering in awe the nature of my experiences and reality under God. And this takes me to prophetic visions, because I've had a lot of visual visions, and a vision is not a hallucination. They're different. An hallucination is the warping of your normal pickup, your ocular awareness, right? It's a warping of what you see, basically, into elements of what you see being twisted into something that isn't there. A vision is like a totally different vision being applied over what you're normally seeing. Something that's got nothing to do with what's around you and just takes over your entire visual field. That is a vision. And I've had a few. I'm not going to discuss them because they're quite disturbing, and I don't want this to be disturbing. But if they do come true, that will prove this concept, retrocausality, might be real. Retrocausality is the act of the future affecting the past or present. Now, if these scary, horrible visions manifest, then that defines retrocausality as being active in reality, even if I am but one incumbent of this knowledge. And I don't think I'm the only one. I think St. John the Divine knew of it as well, back in the day, but it's very scary, and I don't want to talk about that. I think I've talked, have I only talked for half an hour? My God, it seemed like an age, hasn't it? Well, I think I've said all I can, but I'm just going to leave it soon. The point is that I do have a supernatural mind. It doesn't mean I can do telekinesis. It doesn't mean I'm really telepathic, although I do hear voices and it feels like I hear thoughts all the time. But it's not necessarily true. In fact, I know it's not true. The threats I've had so many death threats in my mind from demonic voices, and I've chased them up to make sure my parents were okay, or my loved ones were okay, or my friends were okay, and they're always fine. So it proves that the demonic voices are demons, because what they say is lies, and all liars are damned. This is the gravitas of being a soul under God, the importance, the power of being truthful, and the desperate circumstances you will get into if you're wayward and off the path in sinful living and behavior. It's just not going to work. You can think you're bigger than God if you want, but you'll end up crippled. You'll end up screwed. It won't work. And it doesn't matter if you don't know everything. No one knows everything. Heaven knows I don't know everything. Not even angels in the Bible are omniscient. So don't think any human knows everything. It's just not going to happen. All we can really do is love one another and apply caring advice if someone is in peril, and maybe help them, But really, it is an absolute gift to have consciousness, painless consciousness. And I can meditate. Well, I don't stop meditating, really. I'm perpetually in a state of consciousness and meditative sort of query and prayer and wonder and awe and adore for the Lord. And I love it. And in that, I feed off that energy towards creative outlay, because the more inspired I am by these supernatural events and God and powerful forces that are unknown, and not all bad. God is not bad. angels are not all bad, then reality becomes, what is reality again? Because it's like my reality is totally different to the bog standard version that most people apply themselves to considering truth, and yet true it is. There was a burn mark on my hoodie from where the angels flicked the cigarette, which I had. I lost the hoodie years ago, sadly, but that burn mark was basically made by angels, and I can't prove any of it in a lab, as the atheists well know, but that's irrelevant. So what? I know exactly what I've been through, and I'm not going to refute God. I would die for him on Judgment Day against the satanic rises of the beast if I had to, if it happened in our lifetime, which I pray it doesn't. But apart from that, I consider the act of breath itself to be such a awe-inspired wandering of inspiration at good times, when I'm in a good place, in the zone, just looking around at the light and the colour beige and beautiful things, and I realise everything is truly, intercosmically, miraculously amazing and really quite lovely. And that's what we should be as men. We should be lovely. We shouldn't be hard, thuggish, ignorant, violent brutes. We shouldn't be stupid, ignorant criminals breaking the laws continuously in an antisocial, aggressive way of violence. We shouldn't be doing anything like that. We should be practicing being lovely and helping the community where we can, because that's all you can really do. And I'm not so solipsist that I think that my reality is the only reality. I think all our realities are the only reality. I just happened to find a way through faith to access a supernatural plane in which it is not all great. Don't think it's all great in parties as a schizophrenic. No. It's actually very daunting and scary with all the voices. But knowing there's a God who's backing me up, who's got my back through all that I've been through, that's comforting. What perfect time to end. Continue.